So now we're going to talk about the component form of a vector. So in order to talk about the component form of a vector, we think of vectors as having initial point, the origin. So your vectors are always going to start at the origin and then go out from there to some other point. So let's say my terminal point here is some v1, v2 coordinate, and here would be my vector v. And so the way we define this component form is the following. The component form of this vector v is the vector, and we write it with angle brackets, v1, v2. So when we use parentheses, we're talking about a point, but here we use these angle brackets, which mean we're talking about a vector. So component form is really nice and convenient. In one way, it makes it easy to tell if two vectors are equivalent or equal. So we can say two vectors u and v are equal if and only if the first entries match, so u1 equals v1, and the second entries match, u2 equals v2. Well, what if your vector does not start at the origin? So let's say I have a vector v. If v has some initial point, so I'm going to call its initial point P1, P2, and it has terminal point Q1, Q2, it's really easy to write this vector v with component form. The component form of v is, well, you just subtract, take the terminal point and subtract the initial in each coordinate. So Q1 minus P1, Q2 minus P2. What's also nice about having component form is it's really easy to find the length or magnitude of your vector. So the length of v, you just take the square root of Q1 minus P1 squared and Q2 minus P2 squared. So you take the first entry and square it, the second entry square it, add them together, and then take the square root to get the length. All right, so that's component form. The next thing we're going to do is define a unit vector. So if the magnitude of a vector is 1, if it has a length of 1, then we're going to say that the vector v is a unit vector. So unit vectors have length 1. So let's look at an example here. Let's find the component form and length of the vector v that has initial point 3, -7, and terminal point -2, 5. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find the component form. Okay, that's the first thing we need to do. So remember to write this vector in component form. I take my terminal point and subtract the initial. So look at my terminal point, -2, and I'm going to subtract 3. -2 minus 3. Take your terminal 5 and subtract -7. So it'll be 5 minus a -7. So that gets me -5 and a +12. So that is the component form of my vector v. The problem also asked me to find the length of this vector, so that's the next thing I'm going to do. Find the length of the vector. And again, it's pretty simple to find the length. You take the square root and you take in each entry and square it. -5 squared plus 12 squared. So this is the square root of 169, or 13, and that's the length of this vector is 13.